Greetings. Welcome to our next session together. Today we're going to be looking at Genesis chapter 8. So if you would, have someone in your group take the time to read this chapter out loud, and the rest of you can follow along. So go ahead and pause the video at this time and do that, and then we'll come back together and discuss it. Okay. Now, Genesis chapter 8, a little bit of recap on the things that we were looking at. We noted before that there's quite a bit of emphasis on the very first verse of Genesis chapter 8. The reason for that being the literary structure of a chiasm that is used to point us toward the center, which lands on Genesis chapter 8, verse 1. And a couple things there. Really, the emphasis is that God remembered Noah. And again, we talked about that is covenant language, that is not just God recalling Noah, but that he is going to act in accordance with the relationship that he has with Noah. And so, as we look at this chapter, there's several things here that I think are fascinating, and maybe not at first glance, but I want to encourage you to take your time and to dig into some of these things. There's some things that I think are here that are hidden under the surface, and I don't know, your group might go whichever direction it goes. I don't want to fully dictate that, because I think there's several things here that you could dig into deeper and go one direction or another. So for today, I'm just going to note a few things that I think have some significance, and I hope you chase those down a bit more in your groups. I'm going to read a few verses here. We'll just pick it up in verse 1, and I'll read a few, and then we'll discuss it. But God remembered Noah and all the beasts and all the cattle that were with him in the ark. And God caused a wind to pass over the earth, and the waters subsided. And the fountains of the deep and the floodgates of the sky were closed, and the rain from the sky was restrained. Now, where my version here says floodgates, your versions might say the windows of the sky were closed. And that I think has a connection here in a moment. And the water receded steadily from the earth. And at the end of 150 days, the water decreased. And in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark rested upon the mountains of Ararat. Okay, now, we had talked about before, there's a significance of this date, okay, because this is the date that later in the book of Exodus gets changed at the Passover. That is to be the beginning, essentially, of their calendar, or when they got establishing the times for the Jews to recognize and to honor various feasts and festivals, and of course Passover is one. But what you'll find is this is the same day, the day that the ark came to rest, the 17th day of the month. And it turns out that is the month of Nisan. And the Passover, the killing of the Passover, and actually when Jesus was killed way later, was the 14th day of the month of Nisan. And then, of course, if this is the 17th day, we know what happened 3 days later following Jesus's crucifixion. So it seems to indicate that what happens here is that the ark finds its resting place on the 17th day of the month of Nisan, which is the day of Jesus' resurrection. And I think that has some significance. And really, it's fascinating, all of the details that were given here in this passage. There's a lot of little things here that are mentioned with great detail. And again, if you read this story as if, let me say it this way. I think there's a couple of mistakes we can make when we read stories like this. I think it would be a mistake to say, well, we can't take this literally. This can't be a historical account. Well, why not? Why couldn't it be? And you find that the reasons against that are usually pretty weak. Now, the other mistake that we can make is we can say that this text is only historical and literal. Now, what do I mean by that? Um, when you look at it that way, we tend to put on these very Western, very science-y glasses, and that's how we look at things, and that's the only way we look at things. And I think that's a mistake too, because I think within this story, I think there's some things that are hidden here for us to discover and to dig through and to find. And so it's not just to transfer data. It's not just so that we can have all the dates right and all of these details right. Of course, they're important because they're here, but there's also things that are happening in the text that I think are there for a reason, and they're supposed to mean some things to us for reasons. So it goes on here. And the water decreased steadily until the 10th month, and in the 10th month, the first day of the month, the tops of the mountains became visible. Now it seems then that the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat before the tops of the mountains were visible. So, and that would, well, if you've ever been in a boat, if you've ever gone too close to the shore, that makes sense because you can run aground before you see anything protruding out of the water, and that would make sense because a good portion of that boat and the ark is going to be under the water. So it comes to a halt on the mountains of Ararat before the tops of the mountains become visible. And now here's something else to consider. Whose perspective are we using when we read through this text? Because who's out there looking? And we find a little bit later that Noah starts to kind of slowly explore the world outside of the ark, and he does it cautiously, because again, in the text at least, God doesn't tell Noah a lot of specifics as far as how long the rain's going to last, when he can come out. There is a process that we're going to see here that he goes through in sending out the birds and trying to see, okay, when is it safe for us to begin this process of getting ready to leave the ark? Because God, at least in the text, doesn't tell him that specifically. He doesn't say, okay, wait, I'll let you know when it's time to go. God doesn't do that. He kind of lets Noah explore a bit. But then there is some interaction here that we see with God later in verse 15 and 16, where God spoke to Noah saying, "Go out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons wives with you." So there is a time that it comes where God clearly tells them to go forward out of the ark. But leading up to that, Noah is trying to figure out the state of the world on the outside. Because remember, for about a year, when this is all said and done, for about a year, the only world that Noah is familiar with is this ark. So that is it. Everything else on the outside is being destroyed and then is destroyed. And it's not the same. It's not the same that it was before. And so he is now, in a very real sense, he is starting to explore this brand new world, this new creation almost, that has never existed before. And the old things have gone away and there are new things now. And so here's what Noah does. In verse 6, then it came about at the end of 40 days. Now, of course, these numbers are significant. 40 is significant in Scripture. That Noah opened the window of the ark which he had made. Now, that's an interesting thing to say there. Because in verse 2, it talks about God closing the floodgates or window. It's the same word. Some of your versions might say God closed the window of the heavens. Now, of course, God made the heavens, and he is closing the window of that, giving the picture that the rain is now stopped. Here, it says that Noah is opening the window of the ark, which he had made. Now, why does it say that Noah made that he had made it? I mean, of course he did, and if we've been reading through the story, which we have, that would be something that is very obvious to us, that Noah was the one who built the ark. Right? That's been stated in the past couple of chapters several times, that Noah was the one that made it. And so it's interesting here that there's an emphasis here on Noah opening this window of the ark that he made. That's a fascinating thing. And in verse 7, he sent out a raven, and it flew here and there until the water was dried up from the earth. Then he sent out a dove from him to see if the water was abated from the face of the land. But the dove found no resting place for the sole of her foot. So she returned to him into the ark, for the water was on the surface of all the earth. Then he put out his hand and took her and brought her into the ark to himself. And he waited another 7 days, and again he sent out the dove from the ark. And the dove came to him toward the evening, and behold, in her beak was a freshly picked olive leaf. So Noah knew that the water was abated from the earth. Then he waited yet another 7 days and sent out the dove, but she did not return unto him again. Now this is fascinating. This account of the raven first and then the dove. The symbolism here, if we consider, now first of all, ravens and doves are two different classes of birds. Okay, we had talked about before that it was mentioned that there are certain animals that were clean and certain animals that were unclean. Well, we don't get the details on that until later on in Scripture, specifically in Leviticus. But apparently, God had made it known to Noah which animals were clean and which were unclean. Doves were clean animals. And by the way, pigeons and doves are from the same family. And I'm mentioning that because later on, pigeons have a significance in Scripture as well, in particular with regard to being sacrificed. But pigeons and doves are the same family. It's the same word. It's the same Hebrew word. Ravens, however, are not clean animals. And a lot of this has to do with sort of the lifestyle of these animals and what they eat. Okay? Ravens are quite content eating things that aren't super clean. Whereas doves are, let's say, more particular about the things that they eat and even the things that they, the places that they reside, the places that they land, the places that they'll build nests and so forth. And so now there's been some different interpretations suggested here. And I want you guys to talk about this in your group. There have been people that have suggested that the raven and the dove are contrasting the two natures that we as humans have, like the evil or the sinful nature and the unclean, and then the dove representing the clean. There might be something to that. But from this text, now I want to note a couple of things here. First of all, he sends her out 3 times. The third time she does not return. Okay. The first time she returns because there was no place for her to put her foot. Again, knowing that doves are kind of particular on where they land, does that mean that there was nothing that she could land on or nothing suitable yet? Well, perhaps just nothing suitable at this point in time. And then when she returns the second time, she has an olive leaf in her beak. Now this is this is fascinating. First of all, if you were to do a study on doves in Scripture, um, you find you're going to find in a few places. One of probably the most significance is the baptism of Jesus, where the Spirit of God descends like a dove, and it rests on him. It abides on him. Okay, that I think there's something there. When you think about what the ark represents, when you think about this interaction of this sending out and this coming back and all of these things here, um, look at the language here. When she comes back in verse 9, but the dove found no resting place for the sole of her foot, so she returned to him into the ark, for the water was on the surface of all the earth. Then he put out his hand and took her and brought her into the ark to himself. That's a lot of details there about this dove going out and then it coming back, and then Noah taking it in his hand and then bringing it to himself into the ark. Um, why are those details given? And I think there's some lessons and some pictures there that are of value for us. And again, I'll let you guys explore that in your group. Um, Now, the fact that she comes back a second time with an olive leaf in her beak. Now, this is the first time an olive leaf is mentioned in Scripture. Okay, we know significance of this later on, where olive trees are symbolic, or olive trees are used for olive oil, which is used in lamps and in anointings and different things. Um, the picture here, and there's, you probably seen images of this, right, where there's a dove and there's an olive branch in her beak, and it's a symbol of peace. Sometimes it's used, the expression is used, extending an olive branch is this, is an expression of an attempt at reconciling with another person, perhaps a relationship that's been broken, but you're approaching that person, extending peace to them. Now, of course, it doesn't say an olive branch was in her beak; it was an olive leaf. Okay, but the imagery, and I think it's derived from this, that it is, this dove with an olive branch is where we get that imagery from. But here specifically, it does say that she brings this olive leaf. Now, on a practical scale, what does this mean for Noah? I mean, this the fact that there's any kind of vegetation that this dove brings back. This dove is bringing proof to Noah that there is habitable land out there now. And so there's this assurance that the dove is bringing to Noah. How did the dove know to do this, right? How did the dove know, that Noah needed this information, right? And there's a lot of strange things that are happening there, where um, there's, of course, on one side the imagery of it all, but also on the practical side for Noah, that now there are trees growing, right? And trees can't grow in the water, and so that we know that there's enough land, and the fact that it's producing leaves, right, means that it's at a certain state in its growth. And so, and this is, again, this is a picture of this new life that is coming out from a place of only death and destruction, that there is new creation coming forth. But again, talk about some of these things. I'm just kind of going over the surface of this. I'm going to skip down, and last couple things that I want to mention here, is when they leave the ark, in verse 20. Now this is significant. So toward the end of the chapter here, as soon as they leave the ark, Noah, his family, and the animals. It says, then Noah built an altar to the Lord and took every clean animal and every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. Okay, so immediately what God does is what Noah does is he builds an altar for God. And he sacrifices some of these clean animals. Again, this is hearkening back to when these animals that he took into the ark, that there were unclean ones and clean ones, and there were different numbers for the purpose of sacrifice and so forth. And so he sacrifices them here. And in verse 21, and the Lord smelled the soothing aroma, and the Lord said to himself, I will never again curse the ground on account of man. For the intent of man's heart is evil from his youth, and I will never again destroy every living thing as I have done. God, in response to smelling the aroma of this burnt offering, says to himself that he will never destroy the earth again in this way. He is making this promise to himself. And then, of course, in chapter 9, and we're going to see this next time, but in chapter 9, we see this covenant, this promise that he is making, that he has first made with himself, but then he is extending it and he is making it known to Noah and really to all living creatures. And so we're going to see that next time. And then it ends here, verse 22, while the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. And there's this poetic end here to this chapter, where God is once again, and these are some things that we saw initially in creation, that there are these equal opposites, there are these complementary pairs, and you see this day and night, summer, winter, the different seasons, cold and heat, seed time and harvest. And he's saying this will continue. This will continue as long as the earth is. These things will continue. Again, he's not going to send this cataclysmic destruction of all things over the earth again. He's not going to destroy the earth with water again, which disrupted all of these things, right? Disrupted all of the normal rhythm that he had built into creation with seed time and harvest and all of these things. So again, there's a lot more in this chapter that I hope you guys discuss and explore. And as always, I wish you well in your studies. Thank you.